Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biotensegrity Party number 22 with Jaap van der Wal. We are very excited about today's show, so we're glad you're here. We have been having technical difficulties going in, so apologies if you've been waiting. I'm here, Susan Lowell de Solorzano. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm here with my co-host. Graham Scar is in Nottingham. Hi, Graham.
Hello, Susan, and everyone.
And Chris Marita Clancy is in Deep Cove outside of Vancouver. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Susan and everyone. Thanks for your patience with us today.
We have our technical director, Mariana Barreto, who is in, is it Mississauga, outside of Toronto? Probably I said it wrong. Hi, Mariana. She's laughing.
Mississauga.
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 Mississauga. Okay. See, there we go. Thank you. And then our other volunteers, we have Rachel Tudor in Tumwater. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
And Lisa Babiuk in St. Albert in Canada. Hey, Lisa. And then finally, Jaap van der Wal is here. He's our special guest today. Hi, Jaap.
Hello, everybody.
Jaap's in Maastricht.
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 Yeah.
Thank you. And Jaap's going to open us up with a toast.
With a toast, yes. With a pretty Belgian beer, you know. There's a little dwarf on it. And yeah, I like it. It's Belgian beer. Prost to everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Gambe. Okay, wonderful. So before we get started, we want to hear from a word about our sponsors, and Graham has agreed to do that for us. Would you mind, Graham?
Sure, thanks, Susan. Our Biotensegritea Tea Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, and made possible in part through the generous support of our wonderful sponsors. Starting with Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, producers of highly accessible, easily applied research-based material for movement and manual therapy professionals. They are offering a generous discount coupon to all those on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and our Zoom participants. We are also generously supported by Chris Clancy's educational organisation, Embodied Biotensegrity, in Vancouver, British Columbia. And for those of you looking to learn more about Biotensegrity, Chris's programs are an excellent resource. The membership group, Biotensegrity Trailblazers, meets twice a month, and next week, Embodied Biotensegrity will be recording some new course content with Joanne Avison.
Hey.
The Biotensegrity Tea Party is also sponsored by ArteFactPro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find wonderfully constructed anatomical tensegrity models. ArteFactPro also offers a generous discount coupon to our viewers on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and to our Zoom participants. You will be able to find details in the chat. We are also very kindly supported by the British Fascia Symposium in the UK, which not only organises their biannual event, but also several other exciting programmes that are coming up. And finally, but not least, for the support of the First World Fascia Congress, a virtual conference being held on the 24th to 26th of September this year with lots of well-known speakers, including Stephen Levin, Jean-Claude Gambetto, Frank Willard, and Robert Schleip, amongst many others. So thank you. Back to Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. I also want to thank our invisible sponsors. Some of you sneaky people out there have been donating to the archive in such a way that we cannot tell who you are. Brilliant, but very sneaky. And thank you anyway. We appreciate it. And Steve Levin is here as well. Hi, Steve. I meant to say hi earlier.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. All right, so I think over to you, Chris.
Do you want to give us an introduction to Jaap, Susan?
Boy, how do I introduce Jaap van der Wal? Jaap van der Wal is, well, I'm going to tell you what you don't hear, right? You can read his CV online. Jaap van der Wal is ridiculously charming. And he is so joyful and delightful and passionate about his work. And at the same time, he is completely grounded, accessible, so open. And so even though he is absolutely world-renowned, he makes you feel like you could just write him a note anytime and say, hi, I'm confused about this, help me. And he's so generous and helpful. And so that's what I will say about Jaap van der Wal. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Susan. Jaap, we are thrilled to have you here today. I first heard you speak, as many people here did, in Washington, D.C. in 2015.
Yeah.
And at the International Fascia Research Congress, we were packed into the room that you were speaking in like sardines. It was, and people's minds were blown. It was such an exciting time.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that this is the first time you had really said, you know, from muscle man to biotensegrity. So it was groundbreaking for us. And to have you here speaking is very exciting. Now, I've got lots that I would love to talk to you about. But the first thing my first question to you is this. And it really has to do with the fact that you were way ahead of your time with that first tissue sparing dissection.
Can I interrupt? I'm so sorry. We need everybody, if you wouldn't mind, for this part of the show, turn your videos off. I should have said that, because we do hope to get it to YouTube at some point. Sorry, Chris, thanks.
No, that's fine. It's my understanding, Jaap, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that was part of your PhD thesis?
Yes, it was.
And that it took a long time for the world to catch up.
Yeah.
And then for you to speak at one of the International Fascia Research Congresses. You introduced at some point in the story the Dynament based on that. And I'm wondering if you will tell us more about the Dynament. And also I'm wondering, was it this dissection that brought you to the difference between anatomy, the where, and architecture, the why of the structure of the body? Will you tell us more about that, please?
Yes, I would love to. But you have to realize that the terminology architecture versus anatomy already came up that many years ago. And it was that in the University of Maastricht, we discovered that we made models of articulations, and in that models, we simulated muscles and ligaments and capsules with bands and cables. And then it came out that the stability of that articulate joints did not change actually if you dissected the capsule or you dissected the ligaments. And so we start to ask the question, what role actually are ligaments and muscle playing in that stability maintenance of articulate joints? And then we started to dissect again the regions, the periarticular region of the knee and of the elbow, with in our mind the idea that we in anatomy always dissect in discrete structures. We make muscles, we make ligaments, and that was something we met from our students. Our students couldn't make the structures they were supposed to make based upon their anatomical atlas. They always get confused in connective tissue. So we started a sparing, a saving dissection, removing everything that is not connective tissue. And that is not connective tissue, the bone tissue, the muscle tissue. It was very difficult in those days because we didn't have, three-dimensional reconstruction techniques of computers. And then it came out that there was a continuity of connective tissue that was not in the atlases. The atlases always talk about discrete structures, bands, ligaments, aponeuroses, and we found a continuum of connective tissue. So we were away, so to say, ahead of what is now used usually in circles of fascia. We discovered an architecture of connective tissue, and that means, what is the difference? Anatomy has brought us the body in discrete elements and parts. That's what make. That was the concept of the great Vesalius. That's the concept of every anatomist. He thinks that the body is built up from discrete elements, and if you think it, you make it. We do not follow our knife, we follow our mind. And that is why students always become embarrassed, because they cannot make exactly the structures. They have to clean muscles, they have to clean ligaments. So they take something away. And what was that? That was continuity. And we reconstructed that continuity. And then we discovered that the locomotor system, at least, is not organized as a piling up of separate structures, but that most of the connective tissue, periarticular connective tissue, is not investment layers or separate septa between muscles or separate ligaments, but it all is continuous continuity, and that most of the time the periarticular connective tissue was not parallel to muscle. You have a muscle, and you can have a septum or an aponeuroses or a layer deep, but not parallel, but in series. That muscle tissue is always continuous with connective tissue layers. And that came out a kind of architecture. Architecture is something else than anatomy. Architecture is not the alternative for anatomy. Architecture is complementary to anatomy. Take a bridge. The bridge is built up from elements. And in the way the elements are constructed, that is architecture. And that is given by the mechanical forces, you know, the guiding of tension or whatever, pressure. It's the relationship, the mechanical relationship between the elements. But if you want to sell your bridge, and that's what we do in Holland with bridges, we sell them to other countries. In America, you let them rust upon your highways, but we sell them, and then you have to break down the bridge and sell it. You take it back to the elements, and then another country makes another bridge of it, because they don't have the big rivers we have, they have only canyons. So you can construct with the same elements another architecture. And that is what the difference is. So architecture is the complementary dimension of a muscle anatomy, ligament anatomy. That is my greatest comment on anatomy, that it's not real, it's not reality, that the body is a construct of parts and elements. No, I learned from the embryo to overcome my anatomy. Anatomy is not the organizational principle of our bodies. The organization principle of our bodies, of every living being, is entirety, is wholeness. And the wholeness is suborganized in parts, in elements. So not the whole is built up from the anatomical parts, but the anatomy is a kind of organization of the wholeness. And the organization can follow architectural, mechanical principles. It can follow biomechanical gradients. So that's a different way to look at the structure or to look at the anatomy of it. So architecture and muscle. And I will give you an example in one of my slides. For example, we are used to this model. I will show you. There we go. We are used to this idea.
I don't see your screen yet. There should be a share button. Mariana, will you talk? So we don't see your screen yet.
Here
Oh, here it comes. Thank you.
Take, for example, you know, this common situation. You have a muscle, supinator muscle, and that's a muscle you can dissect. You take it out. And when you take it out, there's left a capsule with an annular ligament, collateral ligaments. But we found out it's never that way, in particular not in an elbow joint. It is in a different way. The periarticular tissue is in series, and that's far more logical, not to have a passive or architecture of mechanical architecture of ligaments, because these ligaments could only function in a very special situation or position of the joint. And then we came to the idea that the architectural units, let's say the mechanical or the architectural units or virtual units are not discrete anatomical elements, but it is, so to say, the soft portion of the locomotor system. And like in the biotensegrity, you have the struts and the cables, and the cables in classical anatomy are always, two ways. It is connective tissue or muscle tissue. That's why every anatomy book starts with chapter 1, 2, 3, the bones, the skeletal elements, the ligaments and the bands, and then the muscles. But it's not organized in that way. And that comes because anatomy starts to work from outside to inside. And first you have superficial musculature, then you have the connective tissue structures, and then you have the joint. But we found out that it's better to think that the units of organization in the locomotor system are not that the bone elements are either connected by muscle tissue or muscular structures, or connected by connective tissue or connective tissue structures, but by a kind of unit, not an anatomical entity, a kind of unit that we call a dynament, which is a kind of synology of dynamic ligament, a dynamic band, and that is in principle to think as a connective cable or structure, architectural unit between two skeletal elements. On the one hand, there is an aponeurotic, fascial, or whatever tendinous layer of connective tissue. On the other hand, also, and in between there's muscular tissue. And then you get a dynamic connecting structure that can be in every position of the joint in tension and guiding the tensile forces or and stabilize the joint. And with that basic element, you can make everything that we are used to in our atlases. This is the classical concept or the classical dynament. But you can also have dynaments of which the muscular part is here directly inserted to the periost. Muscle fibers never insert to bone, but to the periost. So then the periost functions as the other, the connective tissue structure on the other side, the connective tissue layer on the other side. But you can also have a muscle like this. This, for example, is the triceps muscle with a very strong tendon. And here the muscle fibers are most of the time immediately inserting to the periost of the humerus. This is the supinator muscle with the supinator septum, often described as an annular ligament. But the annular ligament is nonsense. The annular ligament is, so to say, the extension of muscle fibers of the supinator muscle. The supinator muscle itself is originating from the ulna. This is a dynament where, so to say, the connective tissue component is less developed, and the muscle fibers, this is a fleshy muscle that immediately inserts to the periost of both skeletal elements. And this is a ligament. And what is a ligament? Is a dynament without muscle tissue. And ligaments are very exceptional. All these classical ligaments that we now know about, the collateral ligaments, radial ligaments, lumbar fascia, even the sacrotubular ligaments, they are not real ligaments. They are real ligaments, but they can only exist or can only be constructed in such situations where in every position of the joint, the distance between the insertion of that ligamentous dynament and the other insertion of that ligament has to be all the time on the same distance. Otherwise, the ligament cannot function. It should be teared, it should be destructed. So it's very exceptional and it's very complicated to construct a ligament. This is far more logical that evolution developed let's say the cables of the biotensegrity system or the connective structures in my architectural model, made them dynamic so they can adapt in every position their tension and be capable of guiding tensile forces for balancing or stabilizing the joint. So that is the model. This is not anatomy. This is an organizational principle. And it works out in muscles, semi-muscles, pennate muscles, ligamentous muscles, or whatever. And that is why I proposed. And then I met biotensegrity. And to my great joy, I discovered, I never heard of that biotensegrity before 10 years ago, that it always also works with two, because that was our conclusion in the 90s, and the anatomists in Holland didn't want to listen to it. We said, let's stop with the holy trinity of thinking in bones, bends, and muscles. That is too anatomical. It's about two. It's about, stiff pressure conducting elements and tensile forces guiding elements. There's only two in the system. We already said that in the 90s. We didn't know about Stephen. We didn't know about biotensegrity. We were bloody medical anatomists, and they didn't want to believe us. We went to the surgeon room with the surgeons to show them that the annular ligament is an artifact. The annular ligament in your elbow joint does not exist. It is made by students and anatomists by taking out the supinator muscle. And then you leave there a piece of connective tissue without relationship, and that you call an annular ligament. And the funny thing is, in an annular ligament, I will show you, the fibers should run like this. Just a moment, the fibers should run like this. They should, the fibers should run.
Oh, it's not shared yet. There's a second button you need to press.
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry, I didn't share. Take care. Sorry, I'm always too enthusiastic. Can you see me?
Enthusiasm is great.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So
here we go.
Here we go. Yeah. So I'll give you. This is the classical annular ligament. The annular ligament is an annular ligament like this around the head of the radius. This is the annular ligament. Go away. When you cut away the supinator muscle, there does not remain a ring of connective tissue that is organized around the head of the radius. No, there is a construct is left that doesn't have circular fibers, but it has longitudinal fibers. It is just dissected, cut away from the aponeurotic layers of the supinator muscle, let's say the fascial layers of the supinator muscle. So that are all kind of examples that the anatomists make their anatomy structures, and we followed the laws of mechanism. So I was very, Stephen once asked me what struck me, what fascinated me in the biotensegrity system, and I said to myself, for the first time I hear now, that message of that a locomotor system or a tensegrity system is about two and not about the anatomical three.
Let me jump back here, because one of the things that I really appreciate about reading your paper, and as a prep for this, I read your paper, Fascia, FABRICA, or Fabric, on the origin of fascia.
Yeah.
And as you speak, you are really emphasizing how we go in there with our minds looking for something and separate and divide, and that the dynamite is useful. It's giving us the mechanics, the relationships. But I also noticed when you're writing about it, you remind us that it's hypothetical, that even the dynamite is something you've gone in to create and find. And then looking at your images, what comes to me are a couple of things. One is John Sharkey. Go ahead, yeah.
It's not hypothetical. I said it is architectural, you can call it virtual, but it's not hypothetical. It is how the system works, because I have a very strong argument against muscle man. I have a very strong argument against ligament man. And which argument is that? The brain does not know about them. Yes. Your brain, your locomotion system, your neurolocomotor system is not organized in muscles. It's not organized in ligaments. It's organized in architecture. The brain knows nothing about muscles. Muscle is an anatomical unit, but physiologists do not work with it. Physiologists, and you also, do not work with muscles, you work with motor units. And motor units is another principle. Motor units is, so to say, a transanatomical principle, transanatomical units. And the brain is not organized in muscle, it's organized in motion. That's what you learn. Mm-hmm. When you're born, then you still have the lowest level of your locomotion system, and that is later, say, the brainstem and the spinal cord with, organized on that whole muscle man system. And there you have the reflex. But the reflex is a motor unit cycle. And then later on, upon these levels, you know, nowadays everybody talks about the brain. And everybody seems to forget in particular layman, they always talk nonsense about the brain. The brain is moving me. You have at least 4 levels in your brain. We forget it. The reptile brain, the mammalian, the primate, and even the human. And that's a hierarchy. And when you're born, you are still, so to say, linked or confined to that lower system of reflexes and cycles. And then gradually you learn to tune in with that muscle man, with that muscle organization or that reflex organization, and bring up higher levels of motion, task, programmed actions, higher voluntarily intentional motions. That are hierarchies. So that means that the brain is not innovating my muscle man or whatever. It is just the muscle man is also, let's say, an organization, is only a part of an organization. That is, let's say, my motor man or my motor man system, and that has levels. And that is what we learn. You learn to overcome your muscle organization in motion, in movements, in acts, in actions. And that is a matter of hierarchy and not of. So my locomotion, my posture locomotion is again not the result of the reflexes. Like my body is not a summation of parts, like my locomotor system is not a summation or a product of discrete elements like muscles and ligaments. No, so is not my locomotion and posture the product of reflexes. That is old-fashioned physiology of the 50s, last century. I was raised in that. And then brain research discovered that the brain doesn't know about anatomy when you're walking and sleeping and doing and giving a lecture.
So now I think is a great opportunity to segue into this question of embryology, because you are one of our preeminent embryologists, and the way that you approach embryology and you're bringing it into the your whole view is, I think it's groundbreaking, it's unusual, and it fits with biotensegrity. So my question for you is, how does embryology inform biotensegrity? How does biotensegrity inform embryology?
Again, we have to do with architecture versus anatomy, wholeness, entirety versus parts. I don't blame Vesalius. Vesalius was a genius. He was one of the first human beings to change our mind, our modern, Western consciousness, to be able to be onlooker and scientific observers came from these guys. They were great. But nowadays, many people consider that anatomy as old-fashioned. No, it's not. It's still there. You can make it. But what came with it? With it came that we all nowadays have an anatomical mind when we think about the body. We still think the body as a structure, as a spatial plan, as a spatial product of embryology, for example, of development. We think that the body, the locomotor system, is, an apparatus, a machine built up from parts, and the embryo is clear about that. You do not start with the parts. You did not even start with a cell. The units of life is not the cell, is not the organ. The units of life is the organism, the entirety. You didn't even start as a cell. You start as a zygote, and a zygote is not a cell. A zygote is a giant metamorphosis. An egg cell is, there are no fertilized egg cells. It is nonsense. When an egg cell is fertilized, it is dramatically transformed in a unicellular body. And then that unicellular body is by means of cellularity the potentiality to constantly repeat and multiplicate. Like the cells are the viruses of your body. They always want to multiply, but this multiplication is organized by the organism. That is what embryologists teaches us, that it is the body that organizes itself into the parts and to the elements and into the structure. So your body is a performance, and that performance never ends. You are not embryo for the first 9 weeks of your life. You still are embryo. It is your primary function of your body. Every living organism is primarily involved in shaping, maintaining, flexibly adapting, constantly repairing the body, the system. So it goes from the entirety, the wholeness, to the parts, and that's a continuous process in time. The body is not anatomy. The body is not a structure. It's a process in time. And that enables every living organism to constantly adapt and repair and, whatever to the circumstances. And that is what's going on. I lose myself.
Oh, we still see you.
Oh, okay, now I get. Am I clear? Do you understand me what I mean? And that is why the embryo taught me that anatomy is not, anatomy is not the way you organize your body. You organize your body in function, and that's what the embryo does. You move. As an embryo, you move. There's metamorphosis. It are growing gestures. It are growing actions. And Blechschmidt was the first one to take that serious. Blechschmidt was a famous German embryologist. He says we have to understand these processes as motions. And he developed a kinetic embryology. And he says that the tissues come in fields. That can be a mechanical condition, can be a biochemical condition. And we now know that first in the embryo, you see differences in biology, biochemistry, mechanical conditions, and then you see that the cells are adapting to the new metabolic situations, and then you get differentiation. So the whole differentiates into the parts, and that's a lifelong process. And so differentiation, the shaping of my body, does not come from the genes, does not come from the cells, does not come from the parts, it comes from the whole. Differentiation is not caused by genes. We now know, it's modern knowledge that you have epigenetic factors, that you have all kind of morphogenes, and now it comes, the morphogenes, all that regulation is of course also anatomical, topographical. There comes fields, and these fields are then, in these fields the cells are adapting to the new situation, and then the genes are organized in that way. So again, the story is not the anatomy, the structure is the result of parts or elements. No, it is performance. We perform our body constantly, first morphologically, then physiologically, and maybe even the psychology that follows that is also a process of performance, but then on the more mind level, whatever. And that is what I think. You have to turn things around. And that is very difficult nowadays, because that gospel of we are built up from the part that the element, no, the anatomist made the parts, and you do not start with them. We are not a machine. These bloody transhumanist philosophers, they say that they want to prevent our bodies to wear out, as if your body is wearing out. Do you really think that your joints can wear out? That it are hinges that they can destruct the surface? No. It are activities, lifelong activities of the fascia to create a joint opening, and that's a lifelong process. If you stop with it, you get arthrosis, and then you start to wear out your skeletal elements. This mechanical thinking about the body is, and that's what I found in Biotensegrity.
And it's so exciting, and we've got some comments here. Please share this great speech. We will put it on YouTube, Pedro, and people are loving this.
Yeah, it's a little bit chaotic, but that comes from the enthusiasm.
It comes from passion, and what we find is really, this is a paradigm shift, and it does influence everything. The way you see the world, the way we see the world, which those of us who are enthusiastic about biotensegrity are seeing the same thing. Sorry, I'm just reading our chat here. Thanks, Joe, for filling in the author. And I got some more questions for you.
Okay.
Oh, there's so many I would like to ask, but why don't I move to this one?
I see an interesting question from Carol. Can you take
Okay,
that?
great. Take it, please.
And that is about these morphogenetic fields, because that is still a great debate nowadays, because embryology, modern biology, is completely frustrated and corrupted by the geneticists. The geneticists came in the 60s of the last century with the central dogma that the DNA is not only a code, but that it also codes, that it's an active principle, that it produces RNA, and then RNA codes for the globulins, and the globulins code for the properties of the cell. And that's not how it works. They found out in 2001, everybody knew it's not going that way. Genes are not active structures. They are passive codes. They have to be performed. They have to be activated. And that is done by the environment. The organism organizes itself in mechanical, biochemical, whatever conditions there are, fields, zones. I will show you the theory of Blechschmidt, because the theory of Blechschmidt was a biokinetical theory. Take, for example, here you have a leg in an embryo. It's a fetus.
Okay, we need you to share. There's 2 buttons to share your screen.
I will show you. Sorry. Thank you.
No, it's my job to remind you.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. Yeah.
That's why we have it.
Blechschmidt talks. You have it now or not yet?
Not yet.
Yeah. Blechschmidt talks
coming now.
About morphogenetic fields and call them kinetic fields, because for Blechschmidt, the organizational principle of body formation were mainly mechanical, not mechanical. There are no pure mechanical processes in living beings. In the body, never there are purely mechanical procedures. Probably, however, biomechanical stress, thus stress affects as achievement of living cells. So do not understand or do not interpret that, for example, a mesenchyme strand is stretched mechanically, but it is the gesture, the growing gesture of elongation, or it is the growing gesture of compression. So the embryo, so to say, pre-exercises in its growing gestures, it pre-exercises biomechanical events that later can be performed in the physiological body, so to say. Biological processes are always more than purely physical processes. For example, he says in there where mesenchyme, pre-fascial tissue, so to say, is subdued to contusion, where the cells tend to concentrate, then you see they lose their water and they condense and become cartilage. But in other fields, you see that the cartilage bone, that at the end of the cartilage bone, there's cartilage added. So you get also a structure that is elongating. That means that the cells around it are in a stretch field. And when the stretching, the dilation is relatively rapid, Blechschmidt said, then they develop to muscle cells. Is it, however, more retention? Is it slower? Is it angular? Then you see that the mesenchyme, the fascial tissue, is developing, differentiating into a tendon, ligament, collagenous connective tissue structure. So it's interesting to see, for example, that in this fetal leg, here you have a cartilage femur. It is elongating by means of this contusion, grows, and it becomes thicker and thicker and condenser, but it's elongating. And then you see muscle fields, retention, tendon fields coming up. So Blechschmidt explains it all in the terms of, let's say, pre-exercising biomechanical principles. So that's the way, and others take, biochemical substances that are, for example, if you listen to James Osman, and The thing is that the organization goes over the mesenchyme. And that was the other genius of Blechschmidt, to stop. He says, let's stop with the bloody concept of the 3 germ layers, because the concept of 3 germ layers has seduced us. Laymen, for example, always think that the body is constituted from 3 germ layers. And every embryology book still ends up with a chapter to show that you have ectodermal, endodermal, and mesodermal organs. They do not exist. It are not anatomical units. It are, again, organizational principles. Ectoderm is not only morphology, it's also physiology. It's also psychology. And again, you should not say that the germ layers are constituent components from which a body is organized. No, when you look at the event, when the body becomes trilaminar, that's in the 3rd week, you have the ecto, the meso, and listen very well. Stop with calling it mesoderm. It cannot be mesoderm. Derm is skin. And Blechschmidt, he was the genius to say, let's stop with the 3 fields theory and let us talk about 2 limiting tissues, 2 body walls, ectoderm, endoderm, and in between, there's another dimension. That's not a derm, that's mesenchyme, that's fascia, that is meso, that is the in-between, and that is your inner. So he says, actually, it are not 3 layers from which you start to constitute a whole anatomical body. It is already the anatomy, the morphology, the structure of an animal body with 2 body walls and an inner. And the anatomist thought, and I did it myself for 30 years, I taught it my students. I feel sorry for that they open a body and that you go from outside to inside. You do not go from outside to inside. You go from outside to outside again, because in there is a visceral body wall that is inside. Out there, there's the parietal body wall, completely different, completely polarity, completely 2 different ways to deal with the world. I can better make love with you with my parietal body than digest you with my visceral body. It's a complete different relationship with the world. And where is your inner? In between. And the 2 major components or organs of tissue of your innerness is, you are mute, Chris. Okay.
Yes, I
Okay,
was unable to unmute myself, so I'm texting Mariana.
And the inner, that's the mesenchyme, the precursor of fascia, let's say that. And that is blood and mesenchyme. And that is your innerness. And there you organize your body.
And we've got so many questions coming in. So,
Yeah,
well, I think what I'm going to do is pull out the most recent, which is because it's specifically about what you've been talking about, the embryology. And this is from summer. Does biotensegrity as an organizing principle begin with the unicellular organism multiplying to form the embryo?
The answer is a loud and clear yes. And it reminds me of a mistake I have made myself 10 years. I came from anthroposophy. I was a regular medical doctor, I was a regular medical anatomist, but I also was interested in spirituality. And then I became acquainted with the models of Rudolf Steiner, and he talks about a 3-fold organization of the body. So did Andrew Taylor Still when I met this man 20 years later, triune man. So did Randolph Stone, the man of polarity medicine. And then I discovered that actually the whole problem is about the interpretation of 2. 2 can be a duality or a polarity. And Descartes gave us a mind and a body and considered it to be a duality. And then they dissociated. There was a split. Nowadays, nobody believes anymore in mind. We only have a brain. We made even of, the mind substance of Descartes, we made res extensa substance. But these guys, these three philosophers, talk about the polarities as oneness, no form without function, no mind without body, no spirit without matter. It's always together. And I saw that the anthroposophists tended to think about threefoldness in anatomy, an upper pole, a middle, and a lower, like Andrew Taylor Still also tend to do a little bit. But then I learned from the embryo that threefoldness, polarity, is a holographic principle. Has nothing to do with anatomy. It has nothing to do with space. For example, these polarities of the biotensegrity, and that's what I love in the biotensegrity system. It's not only in the locomotor system or on the locomotor level, it's also on the cellular. It's also in the tissues. It is a holographic principle. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's an absolute non-anatomical principle. And then I'm back with the body that we live, because that body is not an anatomical body. There's mind in it. There's something else in it. And that is the two-ness that is organizing my spirit, or my mind and my body is not a duality, it's a polarity, and it creates simply by itself a threefoldness. And the three is not a three, the three is a third. You do not have three germ layers. It is not 1, 2, 3. Because if you make 1, 2, 3, you go to 4, 5, 6, and then you end up in a multiplicity of genes and the universe. It is one, and it starts at the unicellular moment. What is the first thing you do in every living being? Polarizing. And it's repeated thousands of times. And the first polarization happens in the zygote. And then you get two half cells that are similar. They are already polarity. And it goes on and it goes on. And then you get dorsoventral. Do you know that dorsoventral is a polarity? It's the same polarity as cranial caudal. In cranial caudal, it are not only morphological polarities, it are physiological polarities, psychological polarities, developmental polarities. That's how it works. Again, the body is not anatomy.
And I'd love to go on with this, but it's my job here to make sure I get you all the questions. So this one is from Neil Galloway, and I am just going to copy it here and paste. He writes, what about the body as transformation as well as performance after Darcy Thompson? Cages, I think maybe stages in embryo and fetus, less well known than the transformations through childhood, adolescence, adult age.
That's it. Ask a layman on the street, does a frog come from a tadpole? 99% answers yes. We think that we come from the embryo, but the embryo, we do not come from the embryo. The embryo is also a human being. Also, that unicellular body is a human body. So it's not that we are produced by the body is produced by us. And what are we? An entity of mind and body. So from the very beginning on, there is this duality or polarity. So the transformation, or as you say, is indeed an embryo is not becoming human, it is human becoming. So it's not, that's the tragedy of modern embryology. Many people think that the embryo is not ready yet. It's a not yet being. It's the most perfect being that you can be when you're 6 weeks old, but it's not finished. It goes on. It's a performance. That is why I call my courses the embryo in us. We still are embryo. The embryo is not where we come from. The embryo is our appearance when we are 6 weeks old or 9 weeks old. Like a child is also a human face or a human appearance. So it's a transformation. And again, you hear the word form. Performance, you hear time.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
I'd love for you to talk more about time, but I'm going to bring you our next question. And this one's from Connie Cook. She's curious about the difference between multiplying and dividing cells.
Yes, that's right. Cells do not divide. Cells multiply. There's only one type of cell that makes the cell division. That are the gametes, the sex cells. They have to divide because of what? They have to separate their chromosomes in two halves. The pairs have to be separated from each other. That is actually a cell division. But as soon as the zygote comes up, that is a unicellular body, then you see that the body is subdivided into a two-cellular body by the tendency of cells. That is the essential of cellularity. That is why cells are not the brickstones or the building blocks from which living organisms are built up. Cellularity is a principle. And you know where it comes from? It comes from the sperm. In humans, it comes from the sperm. In humans, you start with an egg, look at the gesture, and the sperms. If you look at the sperm, you have 10 million of them. The egg forever will be one. And even when the egg has to divide, it does it under protest and remains that huge oneness and entirety and, you know, drops of a polar body. So oneness, entirety is the one principle. Cellularity, particles, is the other principle, and they come in balance and interaction. So cellularity is cancer. But cellularity in an organism is organized. So the organism is again not a product of the cells. The organism organizes its cellularity. This power of constant multiplication is organized in fields, in organs, in whatever. So cancer is not a disease of cells. We now know after 2 centuries. It's a disease of your bio-IM. It's a disease of your immune system. It's a disease of your entirety. That's where we nowadays go with mother oncology therapy. There we go to immune therapy, because it's the IM that fails to control the multiplication drive of cells. And that comes from the sperm. So an organism is parts and whole, but in dialogue. It is a oneness. This is all very philosophical, of course, but I am a philosopher. I'm not an anatomist or a scientist anymore.
I'm excited about taking your course in October, Jaap. I've got another question for you. This one is from Rachel. Can you speak to the relationship between intra-abdominal pressure, levity in the viscera, intracranial pressure, and the breath? She goes on, here I'm going to copy it and paste it and send it to you. She goes on to ask, do you think there is a misunderstanding of intra-abdominal pressure in the conventional biomechanical model?
Yeah.
I'm going to write that down for you.
Mm-hmm. That's also a thing I learned from the embryo and from the mesenchyme. That's what I described in the article Fascia or Fabric. That if you look at the primeval fascial tissue, let's say the mesenchyme, you see these 3 components: interstitium, fibers, and cells. And there are so many derivatives of fascia. I think that John Starkey and Stephen, they are completely right when they say that fascia has more appearances than only, you know, the connective tissue layers of Robert Slide. Also bone is fascia. Also muscle is fascia. You see it happen in the embryo. But you can make a whole cocktail of fascial appearances by, for example, dominating the cells. There are organs, there are tissues that derive from mesenchyme, fascial tissues in my opinion, that nearly only are constituted from cells. Of course, never they become a pure parenchymal organ, because pure parenchymal organs only can be derived from ectoderm or entoderm, because that is pure cellular. And the meso is not a derm, it is, okay. And then you have, of course, the appearances of fascia by, you know, the fiber construction. It can be loose fibers, can be strong fibers, can be dense fibers, hardly any interstitium. Look at the work of Neil Thiesse. And then, of course, you have the interstitium, which is an essential ingredient of fascia. And sometimes that becomes the main ingredient. And then you get so-called body cavities or fissures or spaces. And that are functional spaces, most of the time enabling motion or enabling carrying or floating like the viscera or like the brain. So there you get the possibility to create spaces that are not empty, that are actually fascial activities. That's why I talked about the joint. The joint is not a passive mechanical fissure, it's an active process of cartilage. Your lower intervertebral disc are pure cartilage, which the annular, the vibral, but up there, when you're 30 years old, you create already in your cervical intervertebral disc, you create fissures like articular joints. It's because there you need more also the mobility factor and not only the stabilizing factor. So cartilage can separate and open, but also it can connect. That are the two dimensions. That are the two basic principles: connecting, separating. The struts separate, the cables connect. It is two. It's all about two.
In your paper, this fact that some of the elements separate, some bring together. I remember reading that you're also saying that they can change. It's not constant. There's this constant change in the dynamic quality. And that's really exciting because that's what we feel in our bodies. There is no.
It's good to consider the abdominal cavity not as a cavity. It's a joint space. It's a joint space between the parietal body wall and the visceral body wall, enabling space to move and to mobile. And even there's adherence. It's a way to connect.
There's something for you to explore in your body, Rachel. I'm going to go on. I'm looking at the time here. And we have a comment from Fabiana. I don't have your last name written down, Fabiana, but I believe it's probably the Fabiana from next month's First World Congress.
From Brazil.
From Brazil. She's writing, "You are amazing. And could you please talk about reflexes and biotensegrity?"
There are two ways to think about the relation between, let's say, central nervous system and the muscle, the locomotor apparatus. I learned from my professor that chapter 1, 2, and 3 is not a locomotor system. You always have to think neural tissue, central nervous system connected with it. Then you have a locomotor system. The motor nerve is not a motor nerve. The motor nerve, the spinal nerve is not a motor nerve. It's a part of the muscle. It's not actually not a nerve. It's a part of the muscle, because muscle tissue itself is capable of two things. It can create a stimulus, a trigger, an electric activity, followed by a contraction. And one of the principal mistakes many people make about muscle is that they think it are contractile organs. It are not. The primeval muscle, the first muscle you create, the model of all muscles, the mother of all muscles is the heart muscle. And there you see what a muscle can do. A muscle cell can create a trigger, there's contraction and relaxation, rhythm. That is the essential of muscle. It's not contraction, it's contraction and relaxation. It is shortening and lengthening. And then you see a specialization, you see a polarity. There come the smooth muscles. And the smooth muscles, they are more, so to say, phasic. There the sort of motion becomes slower and cycle. There is cycle the answer. The rhythm can do two things. The rhythm of muscle can be speeding up or slowing down. And when you slow down, you come in the smooth muscles, the cycles. No longer reflexes, but more cyclic. In the voluntary, the skeletal muscle, something else happens. There we go in the direction of the brain, of the nervous system. There the rhythm speeds up and becomes fibrillation. How do you say that? Oscillation. And then you no longer see a motion, but you see a very rapid, change in space. That's what I told you, I think, yesterday. My locomotion is not a motion. It's a constant, rapidly positioning, staturing. I now move my arm, yes, but it's a very rapid replacement in space. And that can be done by this vibrating continuity of muscle activity. And now reflex. That means that every muscle can trigger itself, followed by contractive activity. In the heart, you get already a specialization. There you get specialized muscle cells. The sinus node and the bundle of his are not nerve cells. There's not a nervous system in your heart. It are specialized muscle cells. They make the triggers and the other cells follow. And as soon as the sinus node no longer can function, then you see that the whole muscle becomes chaotic because every muscle fiber in the heart starts to make its own rhythms. And now the motor nerve. The motor nerve, and you see that in the embryo, is, so to say, belongs to the muscle. And it's a way for the muscle to bring his trigger pull, where he, so to say, creates its own triggers to make it, to cause its contraction, make it able to tune that in what happens in a motor, in a spinal cord, what happens on the higher levels of the brain. So actually, it's more like an ear of the muscle, so that now the muscle can tune in with the program tests that are performed and the cycles that are performed on higher level. So actually, it's a part of the muscle. And that means that the reflex is the principle of the muscle, not of the nervous system.
Thank you. No, great. And your discussion about the vibrations and the oscillations takes me to a conversation a lot of us have been having about dynamical diseases and the relationship to biotensegrity, but I'm not going to take up time with
that's why I always emphasize it's a posture and locomotion system. And it's typical for humans to come to the highest level of locomotion, and that is non-motion. When I move my non-motion, when I move my arm, that is only possible because the rest of my body is not moving, is in posture. I do not move my arm. I change the total posture of my body from a body with an arm near the body and an arm abducted 90% from the body. The whole body is involved. Again, it's the whole. It are not the parts, the muscles that move me. I move my muscles. It's not my brain that moves my muscles. I move by means of my brain and my muscles. I move my body. That's typical phenomenology.
It's interesting because Leonid too talks about how that stability is important. I'm a yoga teacher by training, and so much as the emphasis on mobility, but without the stability, there is no, we lose the freedom of that. So I'm going to keep going here. There was a thank you from Fabiana, and this is from Maggie. I would love more on the relationship between the different evolutionary brain structures and the early movement behavior of the preborn and newborn child.
Yeah. Let's say in the 90s, beginning of the century, you still had that model of the primate brain and the mammalian brain and the reptile brain that you can also see anatomically, physiologically as hierarchies, levels. Nowadays, there's more indication that also humans differ a little bit from the other primates, okay, by having even a higher level. And it all has to do with consciousness. It all has to do with threefoldness again. When you look at the organization of your head, you see that in your head with the senses and with the ears and the whole cortical processes, there is consciousness enabled. But if you go on the lower levels, if you come in the mammalian brain, you come in the pattern, you come in the automations, you come in the whole day I am hindered by my brain. My brain put my keys back on the place where I cannot remember anymore with my upper levels. I mean, automatically it dropped the keys on a place that seemed to be logical at the very moment, but is no longer logical when you are 1 hour later. So I always am hindered by my mammalian brain doing all kinds of things, and I love it. That's why I can do so many things together at the same time. And then the very lowest brain is more for my vital body, the processes, for all these automatisms that are on the metabolic level. And then you see hyperconsciousness, subconsciousness, unconsciousness, but there are gradients. There is no, your body is never unconscious. There is no unconsciousness in your body. There are levels of consciousness. And that means that the mind-body relationship is different in the head, is different from, let's say, in the breast and in the middle, is different from in my legs. Don't jump over the rope with your head. Let your legs do it. Every sportsman knows it, that you have to listen to your body, to your muscles. Don't go with this over the rope. You never get over it. So the more you come in action, the lower the level of consciousness has to be. And that reveals something that also this 3-level organization of the brain has to do with consciousness, not with, the brain is only for coordination, that's right, and for consciousness. And now it comes. What is typical for the brain? What is typical for your voluntary muscles? What is the biggest difference with all these vital organs like livers and kidneys? Now, kidneys is not a good example. You have organs that tend to become anatomy. And the most dead organ that is in here, the brain is nearly dead. We all know it. 3 minutes without oxygen and it's gone. So this is, vitality is reduced. The brain is hanging on very thin threads of vitality. But here, there's the embryo. There's the vitality, shaping, performing every day, every second of your life. And here, organ, body tends to become anatomy and apparently non-vital. And the more non-vital a structure is, an organism, the more it enables mind. And that is the 3-level also in my brain, that my reptilian brain, there I'm more, so to say, bodily involved as a mind and doing my processes, performing my process on an unconscious level. And then comes locomotion and patterns, and then comes voluntary motion, there comes voluntary action, and then come even mental action. You are never so mobile and so full of mobility as in the cortex of your brain, but no single cell is moving. It is a polarity. Mind and body is a polarity. Consciousness can only be performed if vitality is subdued. Suppose that all the vitality and metabolism would return in your eye. You could not see anything anymore. Even your eye is nearly dead. So dead vitality is also the polarity of consciousness and subconsciousness. Vitality, life, and soul are polarities. More of life will never produce consciousness. Because consciousness is the polarity, it destructs your life, your body. That's why you have to sleep every night to repair all the damage that is now done by listening to Jaap van der Wal for 1 hour.
And it's a call really to bring it back all together, to be whole and complete like we always are, instead of just tending to only be up here. But because you're talking about consciousness, and luckily next in my queue here is from John Sharkey, and he's writing Jaap, based on your, here, let me just do this here. Based on your stance concerning the embryo, when is it or is not, wait, let me read this again. Based on your stance concerning the embryo and when it is or is not a human, do you believe it has sentience?
Yes, of course. Every animal living being, every animated being has sentience. But there are levels of sentience. When, do you really think that a billiard player plays his balls with let's say, the awakening consciousness of his brain or his eye. No, that all happens in your hands. That's subconscious or dreaming conscious level, and sentient. Every being. Yeah, but now we come in problems because there are plans, and the embryo shows you that there's a big break between plant life and animal life. We start in the beginning to build a physical body. That is the cellularity in us. Viruses are not living beings. Genes are not living structures. Cellularity, so to say, is the particle, is the physical body. And then you get the plant life body, and that is metabolism. That's not sentient yet. For sentient, you need the opposite, anti-vitality, catabolism, and that comes in the animal. And even the embryo, maybe in the beginning it's sleeping, but already in the fetus, they might start awakening, becoming aware. That does not mean that the fetus or an embryo does not have experiences, but it experiences on a subconscious level. Ask the prenatal counselors that find, prenatal traumas in embryo, in children. So I do not recall the question anymore, but
the question was about sentience in
I
the
think, and
embryo.
the answer was yes.
It was, and I'm glad you continued on because.
And Chris, sorry, and John followed up the question with.
Oh, I missed that. Will you read it for us?
He says, I mean, before multiplication.
Of course. But now it becomes a problem. Because if you go back to zygote, then you can surely state you have to do with mind and body, and with the possibility of sentience. How will it be before consciousness, before conception? Well, that depends. What you see is conception. Is conception the beginning or a coming in of something, a principle, call it mind, call it soul, call it spirit, that before that time was not yet embodied? So I think that for consciousness, you need a body. But for being a spiritual being, you can be a spiritual being without body. And I think there might be a possibility of consciousness, but it will be a different consciousness and sentiency than you have when you are embodied. Ask the people with a near-death experience. And so I think that the early embryo has a sentience that is not yet from here to there, but they still, they are around. And before conception, you are very around. You are not even connected. In the first week, you do not even enter your body. You are around, but you see there is no activities, so to say, in the body. And then comes the second week, and there starts another relationship. But still, you see that we do not fully enter the body. In the third week, we embody. And then we become a sentient being. So sentient is, for me, consciousness is an act of body and mind. It's the interrelationship. So I think that there might be a consciousness before conception or after death, but that is then a body-free conception. And ask the people with a near-death experience, they will tell you how it looks like. It's no longer me and the world. It's no longer me and my body. It is, look, there, that's you. And you as a yoga therapist should know. How do we call that? Tat Tvam Asi. Look, there, that's you. That's where you're going to. Okay, we are now very far away.
That's where you always are. Thank you, John. My mind was going off to yoga because I know Karen Kirkness is here and Joe Avison. Yeah. But I'm going to just read to you John's response, who says exactly, thank you. I would argue there are no particles on waveforms. Thank you.
There's again the two. There's again the two in the quantum. You have the particle and the wave. And John is not correct as he says that particles are waves. There are particles and waves. There's energy and matter. It's always two. And
I can't wait for the
and the
course.
bloody quantum physicists nowadays tend to think that are only parts. That's why they're now looking for a part that gives consistency, that keeps the thing together. What a philosophical nonsense to first analyze the reality into trillions of particles and quarks, and then you ask the question, what keeps the thing together? And then you build a machine to prove that that is another particle, the Higgs boson. For me, that is philosophical stupidity, or good, sorry.
Okay, I'm just going to read here. John says he didn't say he believes there are no particles. I think he's just making the point about
sorry,
the way.
John, but you understand me. John,
yeah. Okay, and Carol agrees with you here, but here's another question for you. This one is from Summer Eunice. Can you
not
please?
running out of time.
Oh, do you need to leave? We've got 2 more questions.
2 more.
Are you tired? Can we take 2 more, or do you want to close out?
No.
No more, or no, don't close.
No, go on.
Okay, we have 2 more. So this is for everybody in the audience. This is the final 2 questions. The first one here is from Summer Eunice, who asks, can you explain the role of the notochord in the embryo, and how is that reflected in the concept of the central channel or the sushumna in Eastern traditions?
Yeah. Well, that goes very big. Essential for the human being is going upright. Essential for the human being, that's what differs us from the primates, is balance, centering.
Can I actually, what I'm going to do, because I'm looking at the final 2 questions, and I'm going to read them both to you now, because there's a little bit of a similarity here. This one is from Karen, who's saying, can you talk about neural crest cells in terms of consciousness and polarity? So maybe we loop them together if that works for you.
Okay, I first take the second one. Neural crest cell was, I think a few weeks ago, it was Robert Slipe that asked me, but you're now talking about the mesenchyme and the mesenchyme and the meso, but how is that in the head? Where is the mesenchyme in the head coming from? It comes from neural cells, so it's ectodermal. That is the old-fashioned way to think. The old-fashioned way is that embryologists always ask, where do it come from? But I asked the question, where is it organized? And there are neural cells that like if you look at gastrulation, the moment that ectodermal cells more or less, are positioned and become in between ecto and endoderm, and then they have to change their behavior because they come in another field. And in embryology books, it's always emphasized, it comes from the neural tissue that is differentiating into mesenchyme. But for me, the anatomical morphological process, the field process is more important. When neural cells apparently come again in an area of in-between, then they transform in mesenchymal cells. Of course, your brain has mesenchymal cells, your whole blood system in your brain. So the neural crest cells might also be able to transform again, to differentiate again in the connective mesenchyme fascial tissue of your head. So that makes the origin maybe different, but the principle for me is the same. And now if you go back to what is notochord representing, Blechschmidt says, in the growing gestures with which you perform your body, you pre-exercise the same gestures that you later on can perform in a physiological way, psychological way, even mental way. And midlining, centering, coming into balance is the essence, is the fundament of human locomotion. That makes us so special, not our bipedality. The bipedality is not what we perform as unique feature or whatever. No, it is centering. We are the only being that incorporates gravity. And for that, you do not mean a locomotor system, you mean a biotensegriety. You need a biotensegrity system. So we are the only ones that center, the gravity center of our body, inside our body culture. What does that mean? Take it as a gesture. That means that we can come to ourselves. The midline, the central axis, if you maintain it, if you don't lose it and fall back to horizon or disappear in the water, like the lower animals have to do, but if you can maintain it, you maintain an essential feature, an essential gesture, an essential mental capacity to be to yourself, to say, I am. And that is all that is pre-exercised in midline processes. Something like that. I don't know. These are ideas.
Sorry, I'm talking away and I'm muted here. We've got, bravo, wow, your people are just blown away by this. And I'm looking at the time, and Susan, we need to start to round up. May I pass the mic over to you, Susan?
Yes. Jaap, I will. Jaap. Go ahead.
Yes?
Yes, go ahead. You were going to say?
Okay, I say, can I get the chat list?
Oh, yes, I will send you the chat afterwards.
So maybe I will answer some of you. Not all, I cannot promise that. But it's Corona time, you never know. Maybe a course is canceled, but I will try some questions maybe to come back to by email. Okay.
You have got so many people are echoing what we all feel, how amazing this is. OMG, there's words here that would take us off YouTube, so I'm not going to read them out loud. That's you, Joe. And
but enthusiastic words, positive words.
Enthusiastic, oh yes, of course. Jaap can read them. Bravo several times here. So we're really thrilled you're joining.
That are the women in the audience. Where are the men in the audience?
Where are the men? Oh, you were going to speak to us about, I know we've reached our time, but you were going to speak to us about the gender and the muscle man.
Oh yeah, the muscle man. Yeah, yeah.
To add that to the conversation.
Yeah. I try to say a muscle man, woman, or muscle person, or muscle human, but I'm not successful in that. But I should say muscle human nowadays, because that's more gender neutral. Good.
I think there are men in the world.
There are men in the room, yeah.
Yes, I think Muscle Man gets it across. And Paul Thornley is willing to be the model, so I think you can't go any higher than that. So.
Okay, good.
All right. Well, Jaap, Chris, thank you for doing that wonderful interview. And Jaap, you're so kind to join us and be so generous with your time, with your energy. I'm a little teary. I'm sorry. We're just delighted, and thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your trust in me and for inviting me and for organizing this all around us. Poorly hearing man. Thank you very much.
Yes, and what we love is that you're not afraid to engage in the discussion. If somebody says, well, wait a minute, I see it this way, you're very respectful in a scholarly, collegial way, and you say, okay, let's talk about it. Let's get into it. Here's why I think this, and we really appreciate it.
Okay.
And how about, would it be all right if we had Steve on just for a couple of words before we close out? Are you willing, Steve? You have to.
I'm opening up. Yes, yes, of course. Well, yeah, I can't thank you enough. I mean, we have really coordinated our thinking, and you know, it's really wonderful how we come from different places to get all together and have blended these thoughts so that they just, you know, mesh together. It really is spectacular.
Yeah, it's still my mission to build a bridge between classical scientific anatomy and functional biotensegrity thinking. But you have to bridge it. It can be done. You are worried about it. I know you think they are maybe incompatible, but I think we can bring it together.
I think this is the great thing.
After hearing you today, I think we can.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. We look forward to that. Wow. Okay, well, go ahead. Did you have something else to say, Steve?
Now I see Carol, and there was a moment, Carol, that we approached that problem of innerness, because innerness is a dimension not of the anatomical body. The anatomical body has no innerness. Only this primary phenomenological body, there is inside and outside. So this is obscure, this is ambiguous, our terminology about interoception and proprioception. We have to reformulate that. You understand? Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate everyone joining us from all over the world, especially our special guest, Jaap. But really, we appreciate all of you. We appreciate you jumping in and telling us where you're coming in from and what you're doing. And yeah, Jaap, why don't we do one more toast? It's a good idea.
Oh yeah, I didn't drink anything.
We didn't have enough beer. That's the problem.
Yeah. Good. All the best, and thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Graham, maybe you could just thank our sponsors one more time.
Yes, thank you, Susan. And thank you all. The Biotensegritea Tea Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, and made possible in part through the generous support of our wonderful sponsors. Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, producers of highly accessible, easily applied research-based material for movement and manual therapy professionals. We're also generously supported by Chris Clancy's educational organisation, Embodied Biotensegrity in Vancouver, British Columbia. And for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity, Chris's programs are an excellent resource. The membership group, Biotensegrity Trailblazers, meets twice a month, and next week, Embodied Biotensegrity will be recording some new course content with Joanne Avison. The Biotensegrity Tea Party is also sponsored by ArteFactPro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find wonderfully constructed anatomical tensegrity models. ArteFactPro also offers a generous discount coupon to all our viewers on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list. We're also very kindly supported by the British Fascia Symposium in the UK, which not only organises their biannual event, but also several other exciting programmes coming up. And lastly, for the support of the First World Fascia Congress, a virtual conference being held on the 24th to 26th of September this year, with lots of well-known speakers, including Stephen Levin, Jean-Claude Gambetto, Frank Willard, and Robert Schleip, and many others. So thank you. Back to you, Susan.
All right. And I believe until the 28th, that is the First World Congress of Fascia is still open for papers, for presentation suggestions. So please check that out. They are specifically asking for presentations on fascia as related to biotensegrity, biotensegrity as related to fascia. So if you've got something to say, jump in and fill something out. It's just a short 2-page form. So I would say go for that. And thank you to our volunteers, Mariana Barreto and Lisa Babiuk and Rachel Tudor. And thanks to my co-hosts, Graham and Chris. We are just always so delighted to do this. And I feel like I hate hanging up the phone each time, you know? I just wanted to go on and on. Mariana, did you have something to say? Please.
Yes, just to clarify, because obviously there was a problem with Zoom. I checked actually, and there are many reports about today's issue in streaming. So I don't know if we will send the link to the Zoom recording
We'll put it
And
on YouTube, Maria.
on YouTube. Okay, perfect.
So you
So
can go
after
to
this is done, yes, because it wasn't possible. Like I tried all my
So
different
good.
things.
It's so
Okay.
good.
Yes, okay, perfect. So you, I know you were asking in the chat, some of you were asking, you will get this on YouTube then, okay?
So Lisa, how many days do you need before you'll have it up on YouTube? Can you hear me, Lisa? Show us with your fingers.
She's muted and she can't unmute.
Now,
Oh,
When I get the recording, I'm gonna edit it and put it up.
Okay, so it shouldn't be too long, hopefully by tomorrow. Susan, do you want to tell us what's up next week?
next week we're doing applied biotensegrity. Is that right?
I believe
I
so.
don't have it in front of me, but yes, next week we're going to do um,
So we have Tricia Hopper moderating the panel, and I know you're going to give your presentation, your video.
Yep, I'm going to give a presentation on what we've been talking about. Steve and Graham and a few of us have been, Chris has been helpful on kind of putting together where we are in terms of a sort of statement of, I don't know, kind of what our thoughts are in terms of applied biotensegrity. And then Carol Davis is going to be part of that discussion. And I think Fernando's going to jump in. Is Fernando jumping in as well?
Yeah.
Great. So it's been a very exciting kind of discussion around this. So we'll have discussion, clarification, room for questions, And oh, I wanted to mention with the World Fascia Congress, it's going to be trilingual. Okay, it's going to be English and Portuguese and Spanish. So I just wanted everyone, don't be thinking that it's only going to be in Portuguese. Oh no, 3 languages. So
They're going all out.
yes. So thanks everyone.
So thank you all. We'll see you next week.
Take care.
And thank you, especially Jaap, for this wonderful conversation. I'm so excited we'll get to see you again in September. Thanks all. Cheers.
Thanks everyone.